Spain and Portugal are two of the most popular countries in the whole of Europe to move to. And it's not just because of their great weather, their beautiful beaches, their wonderful culture, or their fantastic food. It's because people living outside of the EU can actually move there. In this video, I'm going to be comparing Portugal's D7 visa with Spain's non-lucrative visa. And by the end of it, you should know which one you're most likely to qualify for and which country is going to be right for you. I will be including clips from lawyers and other experts so you can actually get accurate information on this and not just info from some guy on the internet. Now, before we begin, if you would like a free consultation to see whether Spain or Portugal is right for you, visit portugalist.com/chat. Okay, so let's start with Portugal's D7 visa. It's sometimes called the passive income visa, sometimes called the retirement visa. It isn't exclusively for retirees, but that just so happens to be the largest group of people who apply for this visa. Why is that? It's because retirees typically have passive income because they have a pension, private or state, or US Social Security, for example. Now, what other types of income could qualify for the D7 visa? So we mentioned pensions, there's US Social Security, rental income, royalties, dividends, interest from savings, annuities, etc. Basically, anything you don't actively work for, but you get a regular payment coming into your bank account. Now, what about savings? Well, savings are a lump sum. It just sits there. And if it isn't generating interest or some other form of passive income, it's unlikely to qualify you for Portugal's D7 visa. However, if you took those savings and put them to work, for example, you invested in something that could generate dividends, or you just put it in a savings account and it could get interest, if it was enough, it could qualify you for the D7 visa. Or you could buy a rental property, for example, or an annuity. Now, how much income do you need?
The law doesn't specify in specifically the minimum amount for this visa against others that I will clarify afterwards. So we need to consider the amount that is the minimum salary in Portugal.
So in 2025, an individual needs 870 euros per month in passive income. If you're watching this after 2025 or you just want the most up-to-date information, check the link below to see the most up-to-date requirements for income and everything else. Now, 870 euros is not a huge amount of money in the grand scheme of things. It's hard to get it in passive income, I will admit, because most people don't get this until they get to retirement age and they have a pension or social security. But it isn't a huge amount of money, particularly for retirees from places like the US, Canada, UK, Australia, etc. Want to add a family member? For a spouse or long-term partner, you need an additional 50% or 435 euros. And for each dependent child, you need an additional 30%, which works out at around 261 euros. You do need some form of savings as well. The law doesn't specify a minimum amount, but it's typically suggested that you have, say, 12 months or a year's worth of savings. Some people recommend more.
According to the information we have from some consulates, we advise to have at least 12,000 euros in the bank account because we saw an official list, I believe it was from Newark, where they advised 11,800 something. So
Okay,
this was something that was needed. Okay.
okay. I think that's slightly above the 12 times 870, is it? So they
Yes, it might be, but since I saw that in an official list, I
Mhm.
just don't want to take risks.
So if you needed 870 per month as an individual, you would multiply that by 12 to get a rough idea of savings. If it was a couple, you would take 870, add 435, and then multiply that by 12. That would bring you to 15,660 euros. Okay. So again, not a huge amount of money to have in retirement, particularly if you're coming from somewhere like the US or Canada or UK, for example. What about work? Can you work on this visa? Well, I should say that the D7 is not a work visa. Okay. There are other work visas if you specifically want to come to Portugal to work. However, the general rule is that you are allowed to work on a D7 visa unless your permit specifically states otherwise. And this is for both local work in Portugal and remote work.
This is unclear, and I might contradict myself because you already asked me this, and I said, "Oh, seen lots of people saying that you cannot work." So the D7 was created for passive income holders, so it it was not intended for people that wanted to work in Portugal. But in civil law, everything that's not fully forbidden, it should be allowed. So many times also the D7 cards say strictly, then say expressly that you can work in Portugal. So I would say yes. I would dare to say yes, although this is not completely clear. There are contradictory positions. And I've seen, for instance, in Canada, they told to a D7 holder client that she could not work in Portugal. Although many times the D7 cards say expressly that you can work in Portugal. So I would say if there is nothing say forbidding it expressly, that you can do it.
It isn't a black and white area. There's a lot of gray there. This is the best answer I've been able to get. Now, accommodation. You do need to show an address in Portugal before you apply for the D7 visa.
Another document that is really relevant is the proof of accommodation. At the time of the visa submission, we should present a proof of accommodation in Portugal for at least 12 months. So normally applicants present a rental contract with that same duration.
So most people typically end up coming to Portugal first to look for a rental or a property to buy, or they do this online. They go and contact landlords directly or work with an agent to find a rental. Some people even buy a property in advance online. That isn't as common and probably not as recommended. It's better to see something if you're going to commit to buying it. But some people have done it and some people have been very happy with the results. Now, how long does the rental have to be for if you go down the rental route? Typically 12 months, okay? So some consulates will accept 6 months, but 12 months is generally the rule. And normally this has to be a lease that is registered with Finances, which is the tax office, so not an Airbnb booking. What about healthcare? So you can use the public healthcare system once you become a resident in Portugal. Now, there is a period just before your IMA appointment and until you get your residence permit where you do need to have health insurance and you do need to have travel insurance for the first period that you're in Portugal. However, you can cancel your travel insurance and then your health insurance and just rely on the public healthcare system. It's entirely up to you. A lot of people now will have both. They will use the private hospitals and have their insurance reduce the costs of that for things that are, routine, simple, maybe small surgeries, but they will always have the public healthcare system to fall back on. Now, in terms of residency requirements, you are expected to stay in Portugal for roughly around 8 months of the year within the first 2-year period.
The holder of it should live in Portugal, and actually if after the the issuance of the residence permit, they stay away from Portugal 6 consecutive months or 8 interpolated months, they can lose the right to the permit. This during the validity of the permit, which is 2 years.
Now, your initial residency permit is valid for 2 years, and then when you go to renew it, it's valid for another 3 years. At this point, you can apply for permanent residency. Currently, you can also apply for citizenship after 5 years, and that actually begins at the point of application, not when you arrive in Portugal and get your residency permit. Now, Portugal is discussing increasing this to 10 years, so watch this space. I'm going to be discussing this more once we have more information, but for the time being, it is 5 years. One other thing to say is that Portugal does not have an issue with dual citizenship. So if you have American or British or Canadian citizenship and you want to hold on to it, Portugal would not have a problem with that. So there you have it. That's the D7 visa, which is Portugal's most popular visa, particularly for retirees. Now, let's take a look at Spain's non-lucrative visa. So Spain's version of the D7 is called the non-lucrative visa. And for this, you need savings, a pension, or passive income, basically income that is not related to a job. Now, the income requirements for Spain's non-lucrative visa, it's a little more complicated to explain, but the amount is based on 400% of the IPREM indicator.
As for the amounts to show, here the base when the administration, our immigration office calculates, okay, the base for a holder to get the non-lucrative visa is not under the minimum wage salary, but on another base that it's called IPREM, okay, and they're asking 400% of IPREM.
Okay, so this amounts to around 2,400 euros per month or 28,800 per year for an individual. Now, if you remember what we said about the D7 visa, you needed 870 euros per month. So for Spain's, it's 2,400. For Portugal's, it's 870 euros per month. And this is for an individual in 2025. So there is a big difference there. And if you have, say, a pension or US Social Security, and it amounts to, say, around 1,000 euros a month, 1,500 euros a month, this is pretty common, you won't be able to qualify for Spain's non-lucrative visa, and you will probably only be looking at the D7 visa. However, if you qualify for both, let's continue on and see what other pros and cons there are when we compare the two visas. Now, just like Portugal's D7 visa, Spain's non-lucrative visa allows you to add family members.
For each additional member, you have to add a 100% of that same base, economic base, that in the practice for 2025 is 7,200 euros.
For example, if you wanted to add a spouse or long-term partner, you would need 100% of the IPREM, so that would amount to 7,200 euros per year for adding a spouse. That means a couple would need about 28,800 for the main applicant and an additional 7,200 for the spouse. Okay. Now, in comparison, in Portugal, you would need around 15,660 euros in passive income for a couple, which is basically half of what you would need in Spain. And I think that's a really big difference, and it is going to rule out a lot of people from being able to move to Spain. Again, if you were looking at this in 2026 or 2027, or you just want to see other figures for future years, click the link below to see the most up-to-date amounts for the current and future years. Now, what about savings? It's not necessarily written in stone, and I always do say that savings when you're moving abroad, very, very good idea. What about working on the non-lucrative visa? So here's the big difference. You are not allowed to work in Spain on the non-lucrative visa.
Non-lucrative visa is granted for those who has no need for working in Spain. They won't be allowed to work in Spain. Not the holder, not the additional family associated to the permit, okay? That's very clear. In the future, when it's settled in Spain, always they can, if the circumstances change because the person found a work offer or wants to start up a business, it can be modified, okay? It's important to know that it's not a one-way ticket.
Working remotely is a little unclear, it's risky and controversial, and typically not recommended. So I think the D7 visa offers a lot more flexibility for people who think they might move to Portugal. They might want to maybe get a part-time job just so that they can earn a little bit more money and integrate a little, or they're not quite ready to give up working yet and they still want to work part-time or even full-time remotely. The D7 visa offers much, much more flexibility here. Do you need an address in Spain like you do with the D7 in Portugal? Now, this is where the non-lucrative visa is slightly better because you do need to show a domicile in Spain, but a rental contract is not a specific requirement. And even then, you're probably looking at showing something like a short-term rental, which you're typically not able to do in Portugal, and maybe only for 4 months or so.
In Spain, they don't say that when I mean they don't, I mean the consulate, that there is a need to secure a rental agreement. But if you go through their website, you can see that it's recommended. It's recommended that you find a place that you rent. The amount of time that they suggest is just 4 months, comparing to the whole year in Portugal.
So this is much better for people who just want to get into the country, stay in an Airbnb for a little bit, find out where they want to live, and then actually sign the 12-month rental. Now, what about healthcare?
The holders and the family won't have any access to Spanish public health system because they did not contribute to our system. But if something happens in the hospital, they won't not be denied the assistance, but they will be billed. So that's why it's important that with that visa, it will be needed a specific medical insurance, okay, that at least cover the basis.
For me, this is a major downside, okay? So I think if you're coming from somewhere like the US, one of the big selling points of Portugal is that it's got a public healthcare system. Even if you mainly use the private system, whether you pay for it or have insurance, you've always got that safety net to fall back on. And that is, one of the great things about living in an EU country. And to not have that in Spain, that for me is a major downside. What about residency requirements? How much time do you physically have to spend in Spain?
The Spanish side is more straightforward. It's 6 months per year. On the Portuguese side, it's 6 consecutive months or 8 non-consecutive months. You cannot be outside Portugal based on the residence period. That's usually 2 years in this, when you first move to Portugal.
This is quite a bit better, okay? So we estimated that Portugal, you need to be about 8 months of the year there, more or less. Here it's 6 months of the year. This is great for those that want to travel or for those that are going back to their home country a little bit more. It feels a little bit less restrictive than what Portugal requires. So what about the process for permits? So the initial permit is granted for 1 year. This is then renewed for 2 and then renewed for another 2. So there are a few more steps here, a few more renewals compared to Portugal. What about citizenship? The big difference here, and this is what has made Portugal so much more attractive in the past, is that Spain requires that you live there for 10 years before you can qualify for citizenship, and dual citizenship is not recognized. Now, at first glance, this seems like much, much of a worse deal, particularly on the citizenship front. However, there are some things to be aware of. First of all, I would say if you're from a Latin American country or you're able to get Latin American citizenship, you could apply for citizenship in Spain after just 2 years.
So we have dual citizenship agreements. So for those people who can demonstrate that they have a citizenship from one of those countries, including Brazil, okay, even that they are not talking Spanish, they will be only needed 2 years of legal residency. So it's high reducement from 10 to 2 years. Why I mention this? Because often we are finding citizens who have North American nationality, citizenship, but they also hold a dual Mexican or Argentinian citizenship also. In that case, even that the papers here in Spain of residency are taken with the American nationality, they are eligible to the reduced term of 2 years.
So that is worth looking into. It's also worth noting that although the dual citizenship requirement is there, and it is quite frustrating, many people who obtain Spanish citizenship do not give up their other citizenship. Now, this is quite a complicated topic. We're going to have an entire video just covering citizenship in Spain and Portugal to dive into this in a little bit more depth, but that is something to be aware of.
Our normative, okay, expressly says when you obtain Spanish citizenship, if you're from a country that doesn't have any dual citizenship agreement with Spain, that is most of the countries of the world, okay, you have to express that you renounce to your own citizenship, okay? And that's it. It appears in the document. It's how it works, okay? But here it's when it comes to things that people, it's like the head explodes because it's a little bit hard to understand. That in the practice, Spain as a country doesn't have any power to take your citizenship of other country out, because Spain only has power for the citizenships of their state, for Spanish citizens. Okay?
So that's it for Portugal's D7 and Spain's non-lucrative visa. Is there a clear winner? Well, I'm biased, okay? I wanted Portugal to win, and I think Portugal definitely wins here for a number of reasons. First of all, the requirement is lower, okay? 870 euros per month. That's very, very achievable, particularly if you have retirement income. Also, you can use the public healthcare system, right? You don't have to use it all the time if you want to use the private system more, but you have it there. You have it there for emergencies. You have it there if you just want to use it, if you want to rely on it, particularly for the bigger things. You can work in Portugal if you want, or you can continue working remotely. There doesn't seem to be a big issue with that. Currently, it only takes 5 years to qualify for citizenship versus 10 in Spain, and Portugal recognizes dual citizenship straight away. So that is another big selling point. A lot of people want to hold on to their other citizenship because you don't know what you're going to do in the future, okay? And if you change to just one citizenship, what if you decide to move back to the UK or to the US or somewhere like that? It's going to make things much, much more complicated. There are also fewer renewals with the Portuguese permit process. However, I will say there are a lot of pros to Spain too, okay? So I really liked Spain, okay? I liked the language. I lived in a couple of different Spanish cities for short periods of time, and I loved the cities there. I loved the lifestyle. There was a lot that I really, really liked about Spain. So on paper, Portugal might be a much, much better deal, particularly if you're looking at the D7 visa. However, if you fall in love with Spain, maybe you'll be willing to compromise on a few of those things. Now, you may be wondering, what about the wealth tax? What about the cost of living? Which country is now cheaper to live in? What about the language? I assume Spanish is easier to learn, but is that really the case? Those are all for other videos, probably multiple videos, okay? So be sure to check them out on Portugalist.com. Now, if you liked this video, and I really hope you did, click the subscribe button. I want you to get more content about moving to Portugalist coming up in your feed. Also, head over to Portugalist.com. There are plenty of guides there discussing each of the visas, cost of living, things like that. You'll be able to make a much, much more informed decision about where you should live. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.